Hi, welcome back. We are on the down home slide. So we have about 50 minutes left, and we're just going to cover a couple of more slides here quickly that show some numbers, and then we're going to go into some pictures and stories about my children and family. So the next slide actually talks about dollars. And all of the things that we've talked about these last 2 hours, I know this slide, you probably aren't going to be able to see it at all, so I'll kind of just give you the gist of it. But this slide was actually researched and put out by the Fetal Alcohol Syndrome Family Resource Institute, which is a grassroots nonprofit agency here in the state of Washington that's made up of caregivers of individuals with fetal alcohol syndrome. And what they were looking at was what unfortunately it all boils down to, because we can talk about behaviors, we can talk about interventions, we can talk about strategies, but the two areas that we need to know more about in order to get the powers that be to listen to us are about dollars and about populations. And, you know, if I were to go home tonight and to call, say, my representative or my senator and to, you know, say, you know what, I have a son who's going to need an individual education aid next year in first grade, and how are we going to, you know, get that funded, or what's it going to look like within our district? And they would look at me and they'd go, Julie, who? So what I need to be able to do is to show them that I'm not the only mom out there, that my children are not the only mom or the only children out there, and what this costs our state, our country, you know, in money and in resources. And oftentimes what the Family Resource Institute found was that oftentimes by the time our children reach adolescence, and remember they've been exposed to all those years of negativity, and they've got the hormone poisoning, and they've got all those other things happening, that oftentimes our children end up in inpatient psychiatric hospitals or institutions. And that can cost our state about $24,000 a month on the average. Now, you know, I don't know, but in my role as a foster parent, we don't get paid anywhere close to $24,000 a month. And yet, what our children truly do need is a family setting, but we need to have a lot of supports and a lot of services in place for our children and for ourselves, increased respite and those kinds of things. So, you know, there again, there's lots of challenges out there for all of us to start changing and advocating down in Olympia at our legislators, you know, with the governor, with Washington, D.C., about where our money should be most effectively used.
Just an email or a phone call.
That's right. The next slide actually is about the numbers. And what this next slide says is that on any given day in the U.S., there are 10,430 babies that are born. That's what, you know, the U.S. Census Bureau shows us. 3 of those babies are born with muscular dystrophy. 4 are born with HIV infection. 8 are born with spina bifida. 10 are born with Down syndrome. 20 of these babies are born with fetal alcohol syndrome, and that's a statistic put out by the National Organization on FAS.
And that's not fetal alcohol effects,
right,
or related conditions, as we're calling
That's the full-blown syndrome. And then there are 100 more of these babies are born with alcohol-related neurodevelopmental disorder, and that's out of a publication called Teratology. Now, the alcohol-related neurodevelopmental disorder, you know, that's just, it's the same word as FAE, ARND, static encephalopathy, alcohol-related conditions. They're all kind of one in the same. And what has been estimated by the Family Resource Institute is that it costs upwards to $6 million to raise a child with fetal alcohol syndrome over their lifetime, as much as $6 million. That's a lot of money. You know, in the general population, it's estimated, and, you know, I don't hold a lot of weight with statistics because truly they're probably not accurate unless we could actually check every single birth. But in the general population, in the statistics that are published, they say that 1 to 3 out of every 1,000 births, that child will have fetal alcohol syndrome, and that 5 to 20 times that will have fetal alcohol-related conditions. Not just the crooked little fingers, but actual brain damage that we can attribute to alcohol exposure. Now, there is a research project, and I don't remember if we mentioned it last week or not, but the university is doing a research project right now in the King County area and doing a photographic screening. And if a child screens positive for the facial features, and this is a population that we're looking at, is the long-term foster care. And if they're screened positive, then they're brought into the clinic for a full assessment. And we have not had any false positives yet. But what we are finding is the statistics or the numbers within the foster care population is tremendous. Remember, I said 1 to 3 out of 1,000 births in the general population, but in the foster care population in King County, it's 1 to 3 out of every 100 children has fetal alcohol syndrome, and again, 5 to 20 times that has brain damage that we can attribute to alcohol. So, you know, I don't know of a system out there that's probably impacted as greatly as our foster care system by this disability. And I also don't know a system out there that has more ability to have positive or negative effects on this population. So we are now going to start. I'm going to actually...
Her favorite part.
This is my favorite part. You can tell I get really excited because this is the part that shows you the pictures of my children. And believe me, I take every opportunity I possibly can.
She owns stock in Kodak.
I do. But, you know, every opportunity I can to share pictures of my children. I am very, very proud of my kids. And so I want to share with you pictures of my children and some of their stories. This is Michael. And Michael is now 12 years old. Michael is in a self-contained 5th grade classroom with some inclusion in a blended classroom for non-academic courses. Michael came to live with us just before he was 4 years old, along with his half-sister Tessa. Michael is half Canadian native and half Scottish. And Michael's mother lived on the reserve in Canada during his pregnancy, and her drug of choice was totally alcohol. Michael has a full-scale IQ of 68, so he's in the what they would call the mildly mentally retarded range. And Michael has fetal alcohol syndrome. Michael is a wonderful boy in the respect that, you know, he wants to help, he wants to please people, he wants to, you know, help Dad out in the garage, do those kinds of things. But Michael truly needs to have a Jiminy Cricket sitting on his shoulder. He needs somebody to cue him all the time. He needs somebody to give him verbal, you know, and sometimes visual reminders. Now, some of Michael's difficulties have to do a lot actually with social skills and social boundaries. And, you know, one of the things with Michael is that he takes all of his cues basically from his environment. And so one of the things that we've had to do is, because when we would get into an elevator, if there would be somebody else on the elevator and they would say to me, well, gee, isn't this great weather we're having, huh? And if I were to smile back and say, yeah, this is cool, we've got sunshine in Seattle, Michael will determine that that must mean that this person is my best friend. And at that point, you know what, Michael would say, hi, my name is Michael Guilo, and we live at 1512 175th Place Southeast in Bothell, Washington. And you know what, my dad drives a red Chevy truck, and oftentimes he doesn't lock the doors and he leaves the keys in the truck. And you know what, we got a big screen TV, and sometimes when my mom goes to the store, she forgets to lock the front door. And would you like to come over for dinner tonight? So what I've had to do is to actually modify my responses. And because at that point I was already getting some pretty strange looks by the time Michael would, you know, finish with this tirade. And now what I need to do is to sometimes turn and to look at this person in the elevator and to say, you know what, you're a stranger and I can't talk to strangers. Now I really get some strange looks at that point. But I'm modeling appropriate, safe behavior for my son, and I need to do that. Now when we get off the elevator, you know, sometimes I can look at the person and say, you know what, you know, I'm just trying to establish and model boundaries for my child, and, you know, they may or may not accept that, but, you know, it's still what I need to do for Michael. I need to make him safe. And there are, you know, situations like at school. Michael was suspended last year from school, and it was because in the afternoon one of the computers blew up in his classroom, and they were moving them to down to the gymnasium actually for the remainder of the day. Well, now, you know, Michael Michael can attend to all of his toileting needs by himself. He's very independent when it comes to those kinds of things, but he's very distractible and he kind of follows other people. And so in his IEP, it's stated that, you know, if Michael's not back within a reasonable length of time, like say 7 minutes or so, that somebody needs to go looking for him. Well, that particular day, en route to the gymnasium, Michael asked one of the EAs if he could go to the restroom, and they said sure. And they forgot to tell the teacher. And by the time they got everybody settled in the gymnasium and they realized that Michael was not with the class, you know, it had been almost 20 minutes. And they went to the bathroom and they found, about 4 inches of water on the bathroom floor, along with Michael and a bunch of 5th grade boys that were in there. And what had happened was these 5th grade boys had double dared Michael to flush paper towels down the toilet. And Michael did that because he didn't understand. He didn't link his action to the consequence that would happen. He truly could not predict what would happen in the future. But Michael got suspended for malicious mischief and for vandalism. And yet when we talked to him, he said, "Mom, I didn't know that's what would happen if I flushed paper towels down the toilet." And I believe him. He didn't. But he also said to me, he says, "But they double dared me too, Mom." And, you know, Michael wants to be part of the group. He wants to have friends. And so when someone double dares him, he's going to do it. Another quick story about Michael was here in Washington, most school districts have bus safety weeks. And even children who ride special education buses have bus safety weeks. And so because Michael is the biggest and the oldest on his special education bus, they gave him the job of, if there was an emergency, he was to put the bus in park, shut the bus off, and make an emergency announcement. There's an emergency on bus 118. There's an emergency on bus 118. And they didn't call me, and ask me if this was an appropriate plan for Michael. They just let him practice for about 4 months. And one thing, that a lot of our children do is they do encode the information if everything is repeated often enough. And so bus safety week came, and Michael did a great job, but the first time that I knew about it was the Monday following bus safety week, when I got a phone call in the morning from someone at the school saying, "Julie, you probably want to come to the school and be there with Michael while the detective interviews him." And I said, "What?" And so they said, "Well, if you come to the school, we'll explain it to you." And I walked into the building, and the bus driver was there almost in tears, and he just kept saying, "Mrs. Gilo, I'm so sorry. I don't want to do this, but they say I've got to. I'm really sorry, da-da-da-da-da." And, I didn't know what was going on. Well, apparently that morning, it was the same driver that Michael had had all year, but they came in a different bus because that particular day, the other bus was in the shop. And the driver's driving to school, and he said all of a sudden he heard this voice coming over his intercom system, and it said, "There's an emergency on bus 118. There's an emergency on bus 118. And he turned around and he looked, and here's Michael sitting behind him making this announcement. And he says, "I did good, didn't I, Ray?" Well, what they realized was that in the old bus, in the bus that Michael had practiced in for 4 months, the intercom or the thing was above the bus driver's head. And in the new bus that came to pick Michael up that day, the intercom was down at by the driver's side of his seat, right in front of Michael's feet, because Michael's in an assigned seat. And what I was there for was to be there while a detective interviewed my son to determine whether or not they should press charges for filing a false police report. Because when you make an announcement over a bus intercom system, it goes to all of the dispatch, all of the buses, all of the schools, the police departments, the fire departments, and the ambulances in that city. And so the detective was there to determine whether or not Michael needed to have charges filed for making a false report. So, when you look at my son Michael, and if we can look back at Michael's slide again, he looks pretty normal. And I just want you to remember and to think about, my son needs a lot of protection, and he's going to need a lot of protection and guidance for the rest of his life. Now, the next slide is a picture of Michael's half-sister. This is Tessa. And Tessa, like I said, will be 9 years old now in July. Tessa was 11 months old when she came to live with us, and we've adopted both Michael and Tessa. Now, Tessa has the same mom, so she's half Canadian native. She has a different father. And Tessa has a full-scale IQ of 110. Now, that's over a 40-point difference in IQ between the two of them. And to me, that's not explainable because of having different fathers, while it is probably explainable in the respect that by the time Mom was pregnant with Tessa, she had moved to Seattle, and her drug of choice had changed to cocaine with some alcohol thrown in. Now, Tessa is a very concrete kind of a person, and we've had to learn to use the same words in not only at home but in school and in all kinds of settings. And when Tessa starts to get out of control or to have rages or whatever, we've learned to have to use, you need to get your body in control, Tessa, you need to get your body in control. Because Tessa can visualize what that means. Getting your body in control means that you have your bottom planted on a chair and that you are, taking nice deep breaths and you're slowly lowering your voice. Now, if I were to say to Tessa, you need to calm down, that's a totally abstract concept in that phraseology, and Tessa does not get that at all. Tessa also needs to have her environment so structured. When we got new living room furniture a couple of years ago and she came home from school to see new furniture in our living room, she couldn't find where the bathroom was in our house because the living room looked different. That's how visually impaired she is. Now,
didn't she ask you what you had done with the bathroom?
Yeah, she said, what did you do with the bathroom?
Yeah.
I can't find the bathroom.
Yeah, she thought the room had moved.
Yeah, she didn't even verbalize that there was something different about the living room. It was just, Mom, where'd you put the bathroom? I can't find the bathroom. So she thought we had moved the bathroom.
And actually, the furniture in the configuration it was in was an unconscious clue, a physical, environmental clue to her as to where the bathroom is.
Yeah.
And she may not understand that the chair that was there near the bathroom is what cued her to go to the next door, and it was indeed the bathroom, but that's
right.
what was going on for her.
Yeah, and remember that she has an IQ of 110. It's very hard for me to explain to people in the general community that Tessa is like a little girl with lots of layers. She's like an onion, and on that top layer you see this, like I said, this very beautiful little girl, somebody who's been talking in full sentences since she was about 18 months old. Somebody who can parrot back, all kinds of things, anything that you asked her, and yet doesn't understand the concept of time, cannot explain a process and justify her answer like what they're asking her to do now in math. I mean, that is beyond her. She has a true learning disability when it comes to math. She's only at the point of being able to add like 2 single column numbers, so 3 plus 4. That's where Tessa is, and she still needs to use touch points in order to be able to even get that concept down. Tessa, her goal in life, she wants to be an author. And she loves to write in her journals, and she loves to write papers. She publishes a newspaper in her school every day, single-handed, and she illustrates it and she staples it together and she brings it to the office and gives it to the principal and to the secretaries. But Tessa's spelling, her written language, is so creative that you wouldn't be able to read it anyway. But it's just been this year, finally, that people are starting to believe me that there is more to Tessa than just that outward appearance. And so we've been able to get for her at school now a program on a laptop called Co-Writer, and where Tessa verbalizes the word, and it will print out a list of all words that start with those first 2 sounds of that word. And then Tessa can go down the line and say, oh, is it this one? And if she clicks on it, it will actually speak the word to her so that she can then tell whether or not it's the right one or not. Another difficult piece to Tessa is that Tessa truly does have an emotional and psychiatric component to her. And Tessa was one of the most abused children that I think, I've ever taken care of. And when she came to live with us at 11 months of age, she had 3rd-degree burns all over her body. She had just completed skin grafting. She had been held on heaters and burned. She had an open gastrostomy. Her stomach had been stitched shut. Her mom has a true mental illness called Munchausen by proxy syndrome. And so Tessa was suffering from a lot of physical and emotional abuse. And so Tessa does have post-traumatic stress disorder, and she does have separation anxiety. So when we start peeling the layers off of Tessa, we need to know that there is that component to her. But underneath even those layers, we also need to know that Tessa is organically compromised. And so the way that we would treat or talk about her emotional or psychiatric issues is going to be different than a child who does not have that organic component, you know, in their lives. Tessa's one of those kids that's very stimulated by outside, you know, stimulation. And it's very hard when you have a wonderfully creative teacher who, you know, wants to do things like studying the rainforest, and you have nets hanging from the ceiling with birds and stuffed animals, and you've got a, you know, speaker going in the background with songs of frogs and running water and, you know, all of that stuff happening. And it's hard as a mom to, you know, curtail the creativity of the teacher in the classroom, and yet knowing that every day that project was going on in that room, Tessa was getting written up. She was being sent to the office because she couldn't keep her body in control. She was getting into fights on the bus and having bus write-ups. And it would have been such a simple thing to modify the environment to make, you know, it more successful for her.
I mean, she could have had a little space in a corner.
That's right.
That went along with the theme, but,
yeah.
that provided her some safety and
Great.
quiet.
And sometimes actually what we do now is she wears earplugs, you know, on the bus, because there's so much noise and interaction on the school bus, in the gym class where there's an echoing in the gymnasium, in the lunchroom, again, where it's kind of noisy and out of control. And she carries earplugs with her, and she wears them, you know, when she's in those kinds of situations.
Julie let her borrow hers from the trip.
That's right. I let her have mine, but I make them give them back to me every time we go somewhere in the van. The next picture is of Theodore. And Theodore is now 17. Theodore we have permanent legal guardianship of, and he's been with us now for about 6.5 years, I guess. And Theodore is the oldest of 3 brothers that we have legal guardianship of, but he is the second to the oldest of 6 children to this particular birth mom. Theodore has a verbal IQ of 55, which puts him in the moderately retarded range as far as his verbal IQ. But if you were to look at him, and I mean, this is not just a rare smiling photo of Theodore. Theodore smiles a lot. And he is the best teenage son that any person could ask for. He is polite, he is respectful, he is compliant. He, you know, if you ask him to do something, he doesn't say just a minute, or when I'm done, or why. You know, he gets
or
up,
no.
or no. You
He's
know,
very sweet.
He is very sweet, and he gets up and he does what he is told. But the part that we have problems with, where we do a lot of education every single year, is in the fall. Because Theodore, if you ask him a question, Theodore nods and he smiles. And, you know, you look at that handsome face there and you assume that he knows what you're talking about, that he has thought through your question and he's giving you the answer, you know. And in reality, you put him in real life or real time in a classroom or you know, some other kind of a situation, and you ask him the question and he maybe doesn't respond, or he drops his eyes and he won't look at you. And people then start asking, so is Theodore sullen? Is he depressed? Is he being disrespectful because he won't look me in the eye? And in reality, it's just that his, you know, processing speed is so slow that, you know, it just takes quite a while for him to answer these questions. Now, Theodore is one of those teenagers, you know, that I worry about, actually, because he is very happy to be sitting in the sandbox with his younger brothers playing Hot Wheel cars. And in our backyard, that's okay. You know, I mean, he knows where he is, the other kids know, you know, I mean, it's all right there. But if we were to go frequently to the park down the street from us and he were to play in the sandbox, you know, with the little guys there, I know, and I mean, and I wouldn't blame these other parents for starting to question why a kid who's almost 6 feet tall, who is very handsome and looks pretty normal, is playing every day in that sandbox with those little, you know, those little kids. But the part that really scares me is that, you know, heaven forbid somebody in our neighborhood or whatever would be molested at some point. And if Theodore were walking home, someday, and there had just been a police report and a police officer was driving up our street, and they looked at each other and they said, there's that kid, the one that's always playing in the sandbox over there with those littler guys, I think we need to stop and we need to ask him some questions. And if they pulled over next to him and said, hey, kid, come here, Theodore would walk over and he'd nod and he'd smile because he's been taught to be polite and he's been, taught to be respectful of authority. And he would do that, and he would nod and he would smile, and they'd say, come on, get in the car, we need to talk to you. And he would trust them, and he would do that. And what would happen, or what I'm always afraid of, is that, if they continued to say, well, we know you did it, just say you did it, then we can call your mom, you can go home for dinner, whatever. Theodore at that point might nod at the wrong point in time, or he might be pushed into admitting to something that he did not do, just because he wanted to be out of there. And it was kind of disturbing. I thought I had pretty much covered that scenario by having Theodore keep in his wallet a note card that said, hi, my name is Theodore, and I live at such and such an address, and this is my phone number, and I have fetal alcohol syndrome, and please call my mother, or my dad, and these are all their numbers, and please call them, and until that, I'm not going to answer any more questions or whatever, or please don't ask me any more questions. And so I couldn't teach Theodore how to say all of those words, but I could teach him how to give that card to the police officer. And I just had a friend of mine who is a police officer actually tell me that if a child looks, in the state of Washington, looks like they're more than 12 or 13, that at that point, the only way that they don't have to continue to, or should not continue to question a child, is if the child says, I need to call my attorney. So I've had to change that card in his wallet to say, don't call my mom, but call my attorney, and I've actually listed an attorney and attorney's number. Next slide is a picture of Ricky, and Ricky is Theodore's brother.
Too cute.
And Theodore is too cute. I mean, Ricky is too cute.
Ricky's too cute.
Ricky will be 10 years old this Saturday, and Ricky has fetal alcohol syndrome. Ricky is in 3rd grade, and Ricky has such neurologic impairment that he has, fine motor tremors that for Ricky to be able to write a sentence may take him 20 minutes, and the sentence may not be readable even after that. And so he's one of the ones that really, triggered my adjusting my kids' IEPs as far as the amount of homework that we would do, because I watched him struggle night after night after night to write just his spelling words, or to write 3 or 4 sentences, and it could take him 2 hours to do that. And it wasn't that he was up dinking around or, being impulsive or distractible, but it was such a struggle for him to get that down. And so Ricky was one of the reasons that we have, put a limit on the amount of homework. So if in 20 minutes he gets 1 sentence written, that's it. That's done for the night. But we have been able to get for him at school now for all of his written work, also a computer program called Write Out Loud. And so Ricky is able to verbally give all of his written work and speak it into the computer, and then the computer types it out for him. And that's been a great blessing for him, and a real boost to his self-esteem, because he's now able to keep up much more with his peers and not feel like such a failure. Ricky, though, Ricky is so laid back. He's a lot like his brother Theodore, and he really is a laid back kid. But that's why when he does have a blow up, and it's usually around a change in his day, like a substitute teacher, or when we have those early dismissal days, and so they sometimes they skip periods, or they squash the whole day down into a compact half day. Those days just blow Ricky out of the water, and he will occasionally at that point still do a drop to the floor, screaming, temper tantrum kind of behavior that could last 15 to 30 minutes and can be very distressing to him as well as to everybody else in the classroom. But Ricky is, just like all of our 4 older children, is involved in Special Olympics. Our kids are great stars when it comes to basketball and track and field. But Ricky has a real tendency to wander, so we have to kind of keep him on task even at Special Olympics. The next slide actually is 2 of my 2 youngest sons. And Nicholas is on the left. He's the taller of the 2 boys. Nicholas is 6.5 and came to us at 11 months of age. He is the youngest of the 3 boys, so he's the youngest brother to Theodore and to Ricky. And Nicholas is the 6th of 6 children born to a mom who has fetal alcohol syndrome herself. So this is the 3rd generation in this family of alcohol-affected individuals. And Brandon is my youngest son. He's just turned 6 yesterday, and he is the shorter of the 2. Brandon came to us at 10 days of age, and the 2 of them have been inseparable their entire lives with us. They're more like twins than just unrelated brothers. And they are just an amazing pair. They've been in preschool. They were actually in a birth to 3 program together, and then in a developmental preschool. And this last year have been in a self-contained developmental kindergarten classroom. 7 children, 6 adults. It's been wonderful, and they have made some real progress. As you can see, Nicholas definitely outweighs and outsizes Brandon, actually by about 25 pounds. But Nicholas, even though he's not growth impaired enough by our standards to have the typical fetal alcohol syndrome diagnosis, his CAT scan shows diffuse atrophy through the entire brain with a hole in the left temporal lobe. Next slide. This just shows Theodore with his 2 little brothers. I mean, he truly would make the best daycare assistant that I could imagine. He really is good with younger children, and the younger children really look up to Theodore. It's a real blessing to have him in our family. The next picture is of our youngest baby, and this is Cayenne. Cayenne has lived with us now for a little over a year, and our adoption was just completed on Cayenne. She is Brandon's first cousin, and Cayenne's was heroin and cocaine addicted at birth, did 4 weeks of morphine withdrawal, and has some alcohol exposure, but does not have the facial characteristics of fetal alcohol syndrome. She's actually pretty on target developmentally, except for expressive language, and that's where we still see a lot of frustration, a lot of that screeching type of cries that are so typical of children who have been cocaine exposed. Now the next few slides, actually, what I'm going to do is to do a running narrative of Brandon. And just so you realize that I'm doing these pictures of Brandon in a sequence because I do a whole training actually just on Brandon because he is so classically fetal alcohol syndrome in all criteria, face, growth, and brain. And so these next slides are actually going to be my story of Brandon. And Brandon came to us at 10 days of age. He was born as a breech delivery, half on the streets of Seattle, half in the ambulance. The cord was wrapped around his neck. He suffered some asphyxia, which is lack of oxygen deprivation. He swallowed meconium. He was born with syphilis. He had feeding difficulties right off the bat. He could not coordinate his suck and swallow. He was very sick as an infant and was in the neonatal intensive care unit at the university for the first 10 days of his life. He came to us as we weren't sure at that point, but probably a short-term placement. And if I could have the next slide, when he was born as a full-term delivery, and when he came to us weighed 4 pounds 11 ounces, so he was very, very tiny. The only thing, if you looked at Brandon at that point, the only thing that seemed to be alive about him was his eyes, and it was like looking into the soul of an older man. It was amazing. It was like he could say, I don't know, I know why I'm here, I just can't tell you yet. He says, but, someday you will all know. And I think that he's showing us, why he is here.
And they told Julie that he wouldn't live, 6 months, a year?
They told us oftentimes in that first year that he would probably not live to be a year old. Next slide.
Hey.
When it was about this time, Brandon went to see the neurologist for the first time, and that neurologist told us that Brandon would be so severely retarded that he probably would not roll over and would respond very, very little to people and to social interactions. They said that Brandon was one of those types of children that years ago would have been put in an institution and would have remained there the rest of his life. Well, anybody who knows me knows that that was a challenge at that point. Next slide. And it was over that course of that first year that, we sought out every source of interventions and services that we could possibly get for Brandon. And Brandon has been the youngest patient ever diagnosed at the University of Washington, and he was given the full-blown FAS diagnosis at the age of 3.5 months. Now that diagnosis enabled us to get him services that you wouldn't believe. He got physical therapy, occupational therapy, feeding therapy. He had an infant educator that came into our home once a week. We had a gastroenterologist, we had a neurologist, we had an ophthalmologist, we had an otolaryngologist. I mean, I could go on and on with all these gologists. But he had a tremendous team on his side, not only of professionals, but other people in the community that just rallied around us and around Brandon. Next slide, please. This is Brandon at a year old. If you see Brandon at this point, he couldn't even lift his chest off the floor, much less crawl yet. But it was at this point in time that we called back to his reservation in Montana, and we asked them if, Brandon were being raised traditionally, what would we be doing for him right now? And they said he would be getting his Indian name. And so one of the chiefs of his tribe came out from Montana and spent a week with us at our house, along with his son and daughter-in-law and 3 grandchildren, and decided and agreed to do a blessing and a naming ceremony for us for Brandon. Well, there was many times, actually more times than not, in that first year of his life that when he was so sick, I slept with him in the recliner with him cradled across my breast because I was sure that he would not be alive in the morning if I, went to sleep. And I would put out phone calls, and all over the United States, people would do sweat lodges and prayer ceremonies and all kinds of things for Brandon. And people would call me and they would say, Julie, we see hawks when it's, we talk about Brandon or we pray about Brandon. And a hawk to Brandon's tribe is a messenger to and from the Creator. And so when the chief said that day, what is his name going to be? I said, I don't know. I just know that there's going to be a hawk in it. And my adopted brother sat down with Brandon, at this point, who still couldn't even crawl, and said, Brandon, you just tell me when we hit the right name. And he went through names like, White Hawk and Winter Hawk and all these things, and Brandon just ignored him. And they got to the name, Ben said Red Hawk, and Brandon started to bounce and coo and giggle. And at that point, Ben says that's his name. And I told the chief, and the chief said that was good. He says that's Machiano in northern Cheyenne. And we went out onto the deck to do that blessing and that naming ceremony, and we had like 50 people there that day. I mean, his caseworker, his guardian ad litem, his occupational therapist, his pediatrician, everybody was there for that blessing. And someone said, Julie, look, and above the deck of our house were 4 red-tailed hawks, and they were circling over the top of our deck. And they circled there for that entire ceremony and then took off, flying. And I believe that it was at that point that Brandon's spirit chose to stay here on this earth, and that he decided to take up his role and his job, which is going to be our teacher. He is our teacher to show us what we need to do in this world. Next slide. Brandon started to walk with the help of an orthopedic walker at about the age of 24 months, and on his own at about 30 months. And it was at that point, at about 30 months of age, that we went to the TOP, to the Termination of Parental Rights hearing in the courthouse. And his mom came, and the judge said, told her that the plan was to terminate her parental rights. And she said, I want you to do that today. She said, I want you to terminate my parental rights today, because I want him to be adopted by the only mom and dad he has ever known. And I want him to be raised with the brothers and the sisters that have surrounded him for 2.5 years. Now, I don't know if as a mom I would have the strength or that amount of fortitude to be able to do that and so I really have to honor her for that, and thank her for that ultimate gift that she gave to us, which was the gift of her son. Next slide. Brandon is truly a miracle. He is a miracle to our family. He is a miracle to all the providers, all the people who have ever known him. And he sings and he drums and he dances like a traditional member of his tribe. But it was shortly after that termination of the parental rights just before our adoption that Brandon's mom passed away at the age of 28 from alcoholism. And his dad died just this last year. His grandmother and grandfather also died in their early 30s. So Brandon doesn't stand an Ice Cube's chance in you-know-what if he ever drinks. Next slide. But this is my son. This was taken last summer on Brandon's reservation in Montana. It was 111 degrees that day. And yet Brandon, this is what he is like. He wakes up in the morning with a smile on his face. He goes to bed at night with a smile on his face. And my goal in, life is to continue to educate and to advocate for him and for all my children. And part of doing that is to do what I do, which is to educate others, to be there for my kids, to be there for other families, so that my son, that smile doesn't disappear. Because I don't want that smile to disappear. And I don't want him to die at the age of 28 like his mom. Next slide. The other part, we've talked a lot about, what I do and why. And if you'll remember back to last week when I said that I have 3 biological daughters of my own, this is my oldest daughter. This is Faith. And at the point of Brandon's diagnosis, actually at 3.5 months, I had been to the University of Washington Fetal Alcohol Syndrome clinic 10 times as a caregiver for foster children for diagnosis. And every time that I would come home, I would think back to, and pull out pictures of my daughter Faith and think, she looks an awful lot like these other children, just she has blonde hair and blue eyes. And I would remember about all the struggles that she had in school and how she would study for hours just to come home with a D on her test if she even passed it at all. And I would think about all the difficulties she had with things like money and relationships and judgment and organization. But even more importantly, I would think about the way that I drank when I was 17 and I was pregnant with her. I'm an alcoholic and I have 21 years of sobriety. But when I was pregnant with Faith, I was drinking 3 and 4 nights a week, and I was drinking a lot. So the last time that I came to the clinic for bringing a child in for diagnosis was 4 years ago when I brought my daughter Faith in at the age of 25, and she was given the full-blown diagnosis of fetal alcohol syndrome. Now, the reason that I want you to know that and that I'm telling you that is because I want you to understand that it's not just women of color, it's not just women who don't have any education, it's not just women who are on the streets who are giving birth to children with fetal alcohol syndrome. It's women like me. And I also want you to know and to think about that the sense of denial is so great that even after 16 years, at that point I had 16 years of sobriety. And I had been to that clinic, 10 times. I actually was already one of the clinic members. And yet it took me all of that time before, I could look at the fact that my daughter was, needing to be diagnosed. So I want you to, when you're thinking about the behaviors and the interventions that are needed for your children, or you're wondering what to do next or where to go, I hope that you will think about my children's faces and see their pictures. Remember my stories, because my kids truly are a success. They are wonderful children, and they are one of my biggest protective factors. They keep me going. They give me the passion to do this day after day after day. And I want to thank my children for everything that they have given to me and that they have taught me.
Julie and I both really do believe that these children are our teachers and that they have a place in our lives and also in society. My feeling is that we don't need any more teachers. I hope we're getting the message. I'm just asking because FAS is 100% preventable, that we don't have another birth. And it's not just the women out there trying not to drink during pregnancy. It's the responsibility of everyone in our community to form community around each other, around those women who are having trouble during the pregnancy with sobriety, around the children that are already here, around the caretakers that have chosen to spend their life with them, because this is 100% preventable. With the help of everyone in the community, we can keep each other happy, healthy, and sane. I just, I hardly know what to say after Julie tells her story, and we both sit here and get teary-eyed every time we see these pictures of these wonderful children, because we do love them so much, and I'm just very proud of Julie that she does everything she does and tells her story, and proud of you out there who are also bringing our children into your home. There are very few people out there in the world who are willing to do that. If there are questions, now you have 5 minutes,
That's
4 or
right.
5 minutes
4
left
minutes.
to call in, 1-800-407-9487. I would like to just spend the last closing moments talking quickly about how to set up an intervention in your own home. And hopefully you've picked up some of the information through all the stories. We think people learn better by telling stories, hearing stories, than watching flip charts and graphs on the screen. The first thing that I think about is observation, and I hope you've heard that, is that the people who have, like Julie, who are coming up with assistance for their kids have watched them. They've paid attention. And again, it's taking away your judgment, your assumptions, really finding out if they are talking better than they are thinking. Do they really understand what you're saying? So observation comes not in just watching and seeing, but listening. And also, again, it's really a good idea to keep that journal. Yeah. Then once you've observed, and the environment you're observing is not just around the child, but it's inside. What have they eaten that day? They are fussy about texture and the way food feels in their mouth, the color of it. Sometimes it's the feeling of their clothing, the texture of the clothing, the tags, things like that. So environment is a big word when we're talking about intervention. Then you create the structure, looking in that environment, setting up that structure that helps them one idea at a time, one suggestion at a time. Then you repeat that, repeat that, repeat that. You stay consistent. You're doing the same thing, leaving the furniture in the same place, whatever that means. And then your rewards and your redirecting. We're not going to say punishment or discipline anymore. We're talking about redirecting behavior. It has to happen immediately. So those are our sort of ideas about how you can create the intervention, because you're the best one to do it. You're the one that knows your child. You're there 24/7.
That's right.
So thank you so much for tuning in tonight. Thank you so much for taking care of our children, and I hope you have fun. Just have fun with them.
We have one final slide, actually, that fetal alcohol syndrome and fetal alcohol effects have lifelong consequences, but the future is not hopeless. We can begin early. We can plan and implement appropriate educational programs. We can manage challenging behaviors effectively, improve support services for adolescents and adults in vocational areas, in residential areas, psychological areas, and we can provide better education and support for families. Thank you, and we appreciate all of you who came tonight and tuned in. And if you have any questions, feel free. Again, we've still got about a minute, so if you'd like to call, please do so.
And in that minute, I give you a challenge. By Friday, you will please tell someone about fetal alcohol syndrome. Just take one thing you might remember from this evening and pass that along, and encourage them to pass it along as well. Good luck.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And good night.
And does anyone speak Russian? Call us. We need you.
We need someone.
1-800-407-9487.
We'll explain it when you call.
9487.
Thanks. Good night.